Hello, welcome back to Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher, and you know that when we're going inside the data, we bring in our analytics expert, Sam Finkel. And this is really part two of a two-part series we started earlier this week, looking at the Eagles 2025 draft through an analytics lens. In the first part, we did the defensive players the Eagles drafted. Why did we start with defense? Well, because their first 5 picks were all on the defensive side. And now we're going to go to the offense, where the Eagles really decided to target on the last day of the draft with 4 straight picks on offense before they ended it out with a pass rusher in the 6th round. So, Sam, we're going to go through this. Obviously, 2 tackles, an interior offensive lineman, a center, and a quarterback. So the Eagles are making their scout team on offense, and some interesting names there. What popped to you right away just in the 4 names? And before you go through that, let's go through the names. Are Drew Kendall from Boston College, the center, in the 5th round. In the 6th round, it was Kyle McCord, the quarterback from Syracuse, Miles Hinton, the tackle from Michigan, and then Cam Williams, the tackle from Texas. What jumped out to you?
Sure. When you're looking at the process that we have shown throughout this, we've always said try to avoid that bottom left quadrant. And you look at these names, and that's the avoid category. 3 of the 4 of them fall there. And, that just sounds like panic, right? It's not where you want to be. But through this podcast, I hope I'll reassure some people that it's okay where they drafted and how they drafted and who they drafted, that even though 3 of the 4 of them are in the avoid category, it's okay. I think it's a very comfortable place to be in the last part of the draft because of the traits these players have. And even though their athletic and production grades don't match up to the averages, there's reasons why these players were selected, and that's okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I would imagine if you looked at every team's 6th and 7th round picks, they probably all fell close into that avoid category for the same reasons. That's why they're late day 3 picks. But you're right to point out that this was a sort of traits-based thing, which is what the Eagles generally do. Not necessarily with the quarterback. We'll get into that. But he has some good traits that maybe not are athleticism traits, but just playing the position traits that make that an interesting pick. So while we talk about that, I will share the chart that we have been using, the charts, I should say, that we've been using to show. Now, you can see that, correct, Sam? Nice blown up big, right?
Looks really good.
Yeah, it looks well. When you put it together, of course it looks good. So again, this will show you with we have the whole draft class, but if you just focus in on the offensive players, it was their production score, their athleticism score, and remind our listeners again what average production and average athletic score, and then the differential categories mean.
Yeah. So basically what I did was I took the last 4 drafts and we took the average at every single position in both the production and the athleticism score and used them to mark, where the averages and where these players fall in respect to those averages. So the differential is just their score minus the average. And that's how we came up with it.
Right. So when we start with Drew Kendall, his average production may be a little bit under, right, what the average interior offensive line who got drafted is. However, look at his athleticism. He is far and ahead his athletic scoring of what the typical offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman came in at.
Yep. And which you feel really good at, especially in the 5th round.
Of course, 5th round. And this is sort of late 5th round as well. So that kind of pushed him into the gem category. And look, the Eagles don't really have a backup center. Sam, you remember last year they drafted, and I would love, I should have asked you if this. It would have been fun to compare Drew Kendall's numbers here, his production athleticism score, versus Dylan McMahon's from last year out of North Carolina State, because that's who they picked on day 3 as a potential backup center. And then he was on the practice squad. He didn't make the team, was on the practice squad. And the Rams, of all teams, signed him off the practice squad. And if you recall, that made them have to go with Landon Dickerson at center because they didn't have enough faith in Nick Gates to put him into a game.
For sure. And I actually have Dylan McMahon's score right now.
I knew you would, man.
So his production was 56, which is 10 under Drew Kendall's. And his athleticism was 83, which is 2 under Drew Kendall's.
Right. So theoretically, Drew Kendall out of Boston College, whose father, Pete Kendall, played in the NFL, projects based on this chart as a better prospect than even Dylan McMahon.
Yeah, that's what the data at least suggests. And I think the fun thing about Kendall is that he does have some positional versatility. It seems like the Eagles' strategy kind of hinged on this concept of positional versatility. And obviously, like you said, it's predominantly as a center and as a backup center. But in a pinch, he probably could play guard, and you'd feel pretty comfortable and maybe even compete for that spot in future years.
There you go.
So that's kind of a fun part of this draft and a big consistent theme that we've seen throughout the Eagles draft process this year.
Right. And to remind people that the status, whether it's gem or a void or fringe, that's the FR period, fringe gem, fringe great, which means they fell close on that chart, is in respective to where they're also being drafted. We're not saying Drew Kendall is a gem and should be considered a first round pick who fell to the 5th round. This is all relative.
Yes. And that's why you see the gold and the silver as at the top with Jihad Campbell and Andrew Makuba, because those are different tiers. So they're looked at a different lens than some of the other guys. And they're actually the rest of the other guys.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about Kyle McCord, because this is fascinating. He obviously falls one of the 3 guys that in the 6th round who are all considered avoids, a highly productive player. Now, 69 itself may not really do justice to the fact that this guy led the NCAA in his first year and only year at Syracuse, and a local guy from Mount Laurel, New Jersey, who went to St. Joe's Prep. He led the NCAA in passing yards, passing attempts, yards per game, all the major quarterback categories. He was actually a highly, highly productive player in NCAA football based on that. Now, I'm sure there's other things like, give us some of the categories that go into quarterback production score.
Yeah, I would assume it would be something like, passing like a passing volume, yards per attempt. It would be, I'm sure rushing factors in there too, which you really don't see too much of McCord.
Correct.
And just
interception rate.
And interception rate.
Right. Do they count? Are turnover worthy plays or big time throws also part of the production score?
I would assume so, because he did lead the NCAA in turnover worthy plays. So I could, if you're thinking of things that would hurt him, that would be certainly something that would be on that list.
Sure. And also not like when you compare him to Cam Ward, the arm strength is not the same. So I don't know that he has as many like 60, 50, yard touchdown passes for all the times that he threw the ball. He is a pocket quarterback. He is a dissector. And he did a really nice job at Syracuse in just 1 year. They only lost, I think, 2 games, if I'm not mistaken. They had a really good year. And the Eagles were very aware of this. So what pushes him into a void, right, is the athleticism score, because he's not a guy who's going to run around and make a lot of freelance plays, correct?
Correct. The thing about him that I know the Eagles love is his processing. I know Howie went on the Rich Eisen show and said that the processing is one of the best traits that he has, and you can kind of see it if you watched his interview with Gruden. You could see like he even has like a strategy for how he places his head, where he can still see the defense, but at least his face guard, you can kind of see where he's not looking. It's very interesting if you watch that clip, and I think that's something that really put him, at the top of the Eagles list of backup quarterbacks that they could select at this time.
Yep. I agree 100%. We actually, Sam had his offensive coordinator, Jeff Nixon, former Eagles offensive assistant, on with us. Adam and I did, and for our Patreon crew, I'm probably going to put a shortened version of it on the mainstream, but he said exactly that Kyle McCord's processing is really at a very high level, and that's going to really help his transition to the NFL. I'm honestly shocked that, and I think this says a lot about how the NFL views pocket quarterbacks now, as opposed to guys who have some mobility, like Jackson Dart, good athlete. But when Dylan Gabriel, and I enjoyed watching, this is not a knock on Dylan Gabriel. I enjoyed watching him pilot that high octane Oregon offense. He's very, very efficient, very accurate. But when you're talking about translating to the NFL at 5'10", yeah, I get it. He's mobile. He's fast. He runs really well. But at 5'10" and not with the greatest arm, compared to a guy like McCord who played at both Ohio State and Syracuse, also big level, leads the NCAA in passing, is a surgical dissector and processor. I feel like 10 years ago McCord would have went way higher than Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There are some things that kind of limit McCord that I think are worth mentioning.
Go ahead.
Just because he processes well, he also seems to, and this is just kind of from watching film how I feel, that he seems to think he can make every throw on the field, which you love. So he has this mentality because I can see it and I can also throw it. And he has some footwork concerns that I know Greg Cosell kind of talked about a little bit earlier. And I think he has this mentality that I'm the best quarterback. I can see it. I can make any throw in the field, and he just kind of can't.
Right.
And that's something he'll need to work on. But I think that kind of, describes his, everything about him. I think that's who he is as a player.
Right. I think as a developmental quarterback that you're not picking in the first, second, or third round, you'd rather a guy have that mentality than be a check down Charlie who is going to have a 68% completion percentage, but not throw the ball more than 10 yards down the field. There's a place for that. And there have been some really good quarterbacks, Alex Smith or whatever, if you want, who have really good talents to be able to do that and move the ball. But I think from a developmental prospect, you would want, just like they got with Tanner McKee, a guy who has a stronger arm, but a guy who also wants to let it rip.
Yeah. Of all the quarterbacks that were there, I think McCord has the highest floor. And so if you're looking for something safe and something that you can consistently rely on, and what you see on film is what you're going to get, he's the guy you take.
Right. Okay. So let's move on to the offensive tackles. They take 2 in the 6th round within about 15, 16 picks of each other. Miles Hinton, tackle out of Michigan. Cam Williams, a tackle out of Texas. So 2 guys who played at a really high level, sort of 2 opposites in how they are. Now I'm curious on Cam Williams because I thought he was actually all right. It comes back to me now. Your point is that measurables factor in to your athletic score. Cam Williams is actually a pretty good athlete, but he played big, heavy. That's one of the things that got to get his weight down. So I imagine that took a little bit off of his athleticism score because he's a pretty good athlete. And Miles Hinton, good athlete. I would think Miles Hinton, Williams, you could say has the better upside if they can get through to him. But I would think Miles Hinton has a better chance to succeed in the NFL and win a job as a backup tackle and maybe try to compete for a starter 3 years down the road because of, maybe being more of the NFL mindset at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. But if you told me who's going to have the better career, I think Cam Williams has a chance to have the better career.
Sure.
But I think you're absolutely right in your assessment. That's exactly how I would have said it too.
I mean, Cam Williams, if he can go to Stoutland University and dedicate himself to getting in the studies, right, and the coaching works, I mean, you could have yourself a really nice story there because he certainly has has a massive wingspan, a huge body. If he can keep the weight off and really learn, I don't want to put him in Jordan Mailata territory here, Sam, but you're right that the upside and the ability to be a success story in this league is there for him, probably a little bit more than Miles.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Everybody thought Cam Williams would go back to school. And I think we'd have a very different discussion. I'm not saying he'd be, a first-round pick, but he probably would be higher than a 6th-round pick because his biggest knock is his lack of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what better place to get experience than Stoutland University?
Absolutely. If you're going to leave school early and enroll in another school, it's Stoutland University is the best one.
Exactly.
All right. So this next chart, this is a new one, right? This is a line graph.
Oh, yes.
The other one's got a bar graph. What do we have here?
I changed it for a narrative perspective. I think it's easier to see where the runs actually come from the position when you see it as a line graph instead of a bar chart. So.
Yeah, definitely. And look at round 4. I guess there were no interior offensive linemen taken round 4. And guess who traded out of round 4 when some offensive linemen on the exterior, a couple of OTs went It was the Philadelphia Eagles.
Philadelphia Eagles.
And
But you can
then
kind of
you see
see,
round 5, round 6, round 7 where teams are throwing those darts.
yeah, and the Eagles partook in the second run on IOL. As you can see, they missed the first one. That Georgia IOL was just different, and I'm sure they all helped each other. But honestly, all three of those guys I hold in a very high regard.
I believe the Eagles did as well. They went a little earlier, and again, the Eagles got out of round 3 after a run on some pretty good interior offensive linemen happened, and that includes those Georgia kids, and then even the LSU kid who is an outside, he's a tackle. But the point was, these linemen went, and the Eagles were like, "Oh shucks, might as well get out."
Yep, and you can kind of see the visualization here, that's why I changed the chart.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the way you did that. And we'll go to our next chart. This one is for interior offensive linemen. It's a little bit of a comparison, right, of where Kendall falls. Now, what jumps out to you about Kendall here among
Yeah.
the others?
So first, I just want to say that you can see the gray shading on the round and pick on the left side. And what that indicates is that's where the centers are. Just so you could,
Good.
the reason why we don't highlight in the next chart, you'll see it's not even highlighted like who's the best, because it's really hard to compare center and guard. But I just want to have people understand that we did separate. You can see where the centers and the guards actually fall.
Right. So basically, there's 3. There's Jared Wilson of Georgia. You just mentioned him. Drew Kendall, who the Eagles got in the 5th round, and Jonah Monheim from USC, who went to the Jags in the 7th round.
Yes. Just with that being said, I do think it's interesting. So Kendall was the interior offensive lineman 10, yet his production was 12th and athleticism was 7th. So, I mean, it falls right within that range of what you'd expect at 10. Obviously, the athletic upside is cool and a good tool and something that the Eagles have been looking for consistently throughout the process. I will say his production athleticism is the worst among drafted centers.
Right.
But, I mean, you like the traits, you like the versatility. There's a lot of reasons why you would still do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm sure the Jags are feeling like getting Monheim in the 7th might have been a little bit of a steal for them, because he's top 10 in production ranking and 14th in athleticism. So maybe not the greatest athlete, but a pretty good producer.
Right. And so I misspoke. He is the second highest center in athleticism, but I meant production. He is the worst.
Right.
That's what I meant to say.
No problem. I knew what you meant. Boy, you can look at here, Jared Wilson, the Georgia center. You were talking about him. Number 2 production, number 2 athlete, first center off the board. He went at 95th in the 3rd round. Man, the Eagles just were not. Listen, we knew they didn't want to, move up for too many prospects in this draft. They did it in the 1st round. But man, what would we be saying if he had just fallen a little further and the Eagles were able to get him?
That would have been a really cool story. Would have loved to have him in that room.
Sure. Could he have played right guard? He competed right away at right guard, do you think?
I do think so. But I don't, again, that would be a transition. There'd be growing pains, but I do think he could do that. Yes.
All right. Your next chart shows some pass rush blocking statistics for interior offensive linemen. You again have the centers here shaded. So what sticks out to you on this chart about Kendall?
Yeah. So among the 3 centers taken, he allowed the highest sack rate, but the second best pressure rate, which are on the right side.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's that. Again, I'm trying to compare like to like. You can kind of see where it falls with all interior offensive line, but compared to the centers, that's where he falls relatively.
Right. Monheim at 0.12 on the sack rate. That's not too bad right there.
No, not too bad at all.
Yeah. Again, Jacksonville may feel like they really got somebody, although the pressure rate kind of high. Now, this is a difficult one for centers. Is this only when they have to block one-on-one? Do we know that for a fact? Because often centers are double teaming in pass protection.
I do believe this is everything. It's inclusive of everything. So it's even more impressive. Yeah. I don't think it's just separated for one-on-ones.
Gotcha. And as we move to the tackles, once again, that round 4, man, it was just not good for offensive linemen. I love this because it really shows you how the NFL in general, not just the Eagles, viewed specific positions.
Yep.
So there was just not great middle round value for offensive linemen once those 3 guys went in the round 3, right? And then from basically the rest of round 3 and all of round 4.
Yeah, you see that big decline, and then you see it pick back up, in the 5th and 6th round.
Yeah, it's just a lot of teams saying it's not that we don't like these guys. We just don't see the value middle round. They've got certain things about them. We know Hinton's pass blocking wasn't great. We know Cam Williams, again, whether he's being in shape. He's the kind of guy who, as Adam and I have been told, he just needs a little bit of a kick in the ass, and we'll see if Jeff Stoutland to give it to him. But that's why you don't want – a round 4 pick is still someone that you're trying to get contributions from, if not by year 1, by year 2, as you want him to make the team. You want him to be some kind of, if he can't be a starter, a situational player, like a dime corner, a nickel corner, or an interior offensive lineman, or your top backup on the offensive line. That's what you want out of rounds 3 and 4. But once you get to day 3, it's a little bit more of a dart throw. And that's why you saw those guys not go there and say, all right, we'll take a gamble on their future and our coaching staff and our ability to develop.
Yeah, and that was the exact verbiage I was going to use is these are 2 dart throws, and you hope one or both work out.
Right. Man, if both could work out, that would be pretty, because listen, again, Cam Williams is a huge dude. So if they both work out, that would be really good.
It would be awesome.
And nobody would be surprised. That would be the funny thing, because they would just say it would be a Jeff Stoutland special, right?
Absolutely. That would be the narrative. There's no doubt.
All right, so as you can see, this is why the avoid category fell on Myles Hinton, right? As we go through offensive tackle draft stats, he's got the red marks in both production and athleticism.
Yeah, just relative to where he was taken, right? He was tackle 16, and it's 20th and 17th. And 17th is less concerning because, that's right where 16 is. But 20, but again, you're looking for athletic upside here. And one of the things that hurt Myles Hinton, and probably Cam Williams too, is they didn't really test much. So a lot of it projected and simulated statistics based on, their pro days or other, information. So it's really doesn't encompass, especially for late round picks, what their actual athleticism is. It becomes less reliable, I'd say, as you go later in the draft.
You mean to tell me that Cameron Williams didn't run the 40-yard dash, Sam?
I do have to tell you that. I know probably breaks your dreams for sure.
I can't believe it. That would have been a sight to behold.
That would have been a sight to behold for sure.
How about how early? This is what really surprised me a little bit. Anthony Belton out of North Carolina State, a huge mammoth man, and Ozzie Trapillo out of Boston College. These are 2 guys that Greg Cosell in particular kind of liked their tape at times. He thought that they could play really well at times, but that they were both so raw and needed development. And here they are getting picked really high in the draft.
Yeah. And as you can see, they're not really great relative. If you're just looking at production athleticism scores, they're not great relative to where they're selected.
Right.
But again, a lot of the times you're looking for traits and tools that they have. And so you feel comfortable, even though they haven't consistently put it out on film or don't have that, high athletic upside, that you can continue, you can kind of coach and create that consistency at the next level.
Absolutely. I hate to say it, I think the Jets had a really good draft, getting Armand Membo, the right tackle. They've got our guy, Olu Fashanu, who's going to play left tackle. They pick up in the 2nd round, Mason Taylor, the tight end, who, we were all thinking might come to the Eagles. So doesn't always happen often, but Jets seemingly had some pretty good picks there.
Wow, you talking up both New York teams on both these podcasts. How does that feel? That can't feel good.
Seems a little weird. When I talk up the Giants, I didn't love the Jackson Dart pick. I just like their other pick. Listen, they got Abdul Carter. We had it,
Yeah.
What are you going to say about that? And I do think the Darius Alexander pick later in the draft, because of his age, made a lot more sense. He's probably late first talent, but you were able to get him outside of the first because he's a little older.
Right. And I agree with both of your assessments. I just had to call you out on it.
That's okay. That's all right. Invariably, someone's going to comment, because I've let it out. I'm originally from New York, but I'm not a fan of either team. I'm not a fan of anybody, but I just thought that they had good drafts. But I've killed the Jets and Giants so much in the past that I guess the law of averages caught up. They're bound to do something for once.
Well, I'm sure that the New York fans that find our video or podcast are going to be ecstatic. So
Yeah, I'm sure.
all one of them. Yes.
Right. No, listen, we do get a lot of listeners from around the region, so
No,
I'm
that's
excited.
cool.
I'm happy for them if they're listening. All right, so this is now the pass rush blocking statistics for offensive tackles. We'll get to Cameron Williams here. Again, not very good compared to the other offensive tackles. This is something we know. We talked about. The Eagles know it. And why can't I find our other friend?
Oh,
Here
he's
Miles Hinton right here,
Yep.
right there. Total pressures allowed 22. That's the fewest pressures allowed among offensive tackles in the draft.
Yes, but I want to be very clear that that's not necessarily like as great as it sounds, because if you look at his pass snaps,
Right.
it's
It's
very
the
small.
fewest. Yes. Yes. And his pressure rate is high in comparison. So
It's
you're
not
right.
the worst. It's
No,
not.
not the
By
worst.
far not the worst.
No, it
However,
doesn't surprise me that Marcus Embo, by the way, from Purdue, is one of the worst, if not the worst.
yeah, also a Giant, right?
Yeah, that was a pick I didn't really love.
Mm.
But that was a later. What was it? Where'd he go? I forget what round he went in. Was it fourth, fifth?
That's not. It's either fourth or fifth. It sounds right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so although that sounds great on paper, and I did highlight it because it feels good, those relative statistics, especially for offensive linemen, are more telling, because just because you allow less pressure doesn't mean that you didn't you have to be able to show less pressure over higher volume, and that's where those relative stats come in and are more helpful and tell a more complete story.
Sure. And by the way, Cameron Williams played even fewer snaps than Hinton. In fact, the Eagles may have taken they took two tackles who have the fewest. You can combine their snaps and not get as many as Kelvin Banks played at Texas, or Will Campbell at LSU. That's pretty amazing right there.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the intrigue with these guys, right? Is
Yep.
we don't know what they actually look like having more seasoned experience.
Right.
And so you find guys that this is what a gem would look like, a non-statistical gem, right?
Sure.
Somebody that you don't see like in a more colloquial sense gem, right? You don't see them in action very much, but how do they project in more snaps?
100%.
And I there's no team I think I would trust more than the Eagles in finding and developing offensive linemen.
There you go. Similarly, quarterbacks, not a whole lot taken this year early on. We saw there were only 2 in the first round. I believe 1 in round 2. It really blossomed late 5th round and 6th round, 7th round. That doesn't speak well for the overall crop of quarterbacks. But guess what, Sam? That's not like breaking news for anybody. We knew this was not a very strong quarterback class.
Right. And I have a lot of thoughts on this pick.
Okay.
I know my thoughts on this pick, but I like McCord. I think it's a great pick. I think that the traits that they want in McCord are great. However, I think if you're going to take a swing in the 6th round, you take a swing on a guy that could develop into something a little bit more special. And there's one guy that comes to mind, and we've had this conversation a bunch, and I'm sure it's going to create some debate. And as a thought exercise, I would love to hear input of fans on our YouTube section, or if you're listening to the podcast otherwise, I want you to think about who you would rather take here. The one obvious answer to me is the guy taken right after, also a local kid, Will Howard.
Right. Ohio State. It pains me to hear you say these nice things about an Ohio State quarterback, but we do keep it real here on Inside the Birds. I get what you're saying, because I think the upside of Will Howard, because he's a far better athlete. I mean, the athletic ranking here from 12 to 8 to me, it doesn't even do it justice, right? I think Will Howard's he's a really good athlete.
Right.
So I get, and he can throw the ball. It's not like he just runs around. He obviously can throw the ball. I don't know. Maybe I just watched too many Ohio State games and felt unimpressed until the college football playoffs, where he was a lot better, or the fact that he's surrounded by, not just only a $30 million roster, but a lot more talent than, say, Kyle McCord was at Syracuse. I just felt like Will Howard left a lot of meat on the bone when I watched him.
Sure, he played his best football in the biggest moments, and also we have to acknowledge McCord also had a very similar roster at Ohio State the year before.
Yes, and won the same number of games, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
But what I think of how Howard just feels very raw, but he could do a lot of the things that Hurts does, and he feels very moldable.
Right.
He's very coachable. He's younger. He has I feel like a higher ceiling. I feel like he can win games in this league. And you already have a conservative quarterback in Tanner McKee. So why not diversify that room even more and have a guy that, it obviously is going to have a much lower floor, but his ceiling just feels so much higher. He has a great pocket presence. He has great feel in the pocket. He can move a lot more than McCord. He is a threat in the run game, maybe less so at the next level. He definitely does not have as good processing accuracy, placement, or mechanics as McCord. And McCord does have some mechanical issues, mostly with his leg work. But there's less risk in his decision making. He's a lot more risk averse, which some teams like, some teams don't. I do think he has better arm strength. Still kind of average at best, but he feels like a pretty consistent passer that you could develop. And I just didn't feel that way about McCord.
I think you're making fair points, and obviously they all go within 8 picks of each other. So it became sort of like a, what flavor do you like? Chocolate, vanilla, strawberry type thing. And yeah, I think the Eagles, to your point, chose the processing and the arm. I guess the way he plays the position over a Will Howard or a Riley Leonard. Because I see Howard and Leonard as similar in that they're much better athletes. Maybe not as good and refined at throwing the ball. So which one do you want? And to your point, usually if you're talking day 3, you go with the athletic upside. So I get it. And I don't knock you for it at all. I don't know if any of these 3 guys are going to be starters or backups in this league. That's to be determined. The Eagles already have Tanner McKee as a number 2. What do you mean, by the way, when you said conservative? Because I don't see Tanner as a check down guy. I mean, he throws the ball down the field.
He does. I think I meant that he's just safe. Like you feel very safe with him.
Right.
Maybe it was the wrong word I used, but I feel like you feel very comfortable with him. So I'd rather have someone that is not, that you don't feel comfortable with, that you have to, see him develop over time, and that could bust. I don't think McCord is going to bust because I don't think expectations are crazy high. And I think, like I said, you know what you get with him, which there is value in that. And I love McCord, and I think he would fit really well as the 3rd quarterback. I would love the opportunity to take a swing.
Makes sense. I totally get your side of the argument. And the beauty of this one is we're going to see how it plays out in the next year, 2, 3 years as we follow their careers. This one, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you look at their stats, they're almost identical in almost every statistical category.
It is so strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, man, look at these completion percentages. Their completions, attempts, even throwing Riley Leonard in there, Now, Riley Leonard, he's the one who doesn't throw the ball down the field. But then again, Notre Dame, to me, did not have a whole lot of, like, their best patch catchers were running backs and tight ends. They didn't throw the ball down the field a whole lot. So, yeah, we'll see. Anything, I guess that's what jumps out at you when you look at their statistics is just how much they're all similar, especially Howard and McCord.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'd say is the only thing that's different is Howard, has a lot more touchdowns. And there's valuable as a quarterback, personally.
Yeah, I mean, there's that kid who'd be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft to this one that just happened if he could come out. Whereas, again, Syracuse is not only that, but then they had a guy who was drafted in the 1st round. They had Ibuka, right, who was drafted in the 1st round, and they have probably the best wide receiver in football, 2 or 3 offensive linemen that were amazing. So I don't want to. I get your point. Yeah, he did throw a lot of touchdowns.
This is 3-year data, so you got to put Will Howard also in there. So
I suppose you do. That's fair. It is 3-year data, so you have to put McCord in Ohio State, those numbers in as well. That's
so
fair.
there's some K-State data for Will Howard,
right? And then McCord also had a 1st-round pick in Marvin Harrison Jr. So you're making a good point.
That's all I'll say. I'll leave it at that.
All right. Good stuff. Excellent stuff. Really look forward every time we do Inside the Data. You always bring a great perspective and give us something to think about. So, Sam, great job once again.
Thank you.
All right. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You have been watching Inside the Data on Inside the Birds.